I do care what you do with this information because it is important to our survival as a species. It's important to our planet. It is important for the world.
In the best of the rest of the news, Jeb Bush might want to start thinking about trading in the white pillars of the White House for the cold steel bars of a jail cell. That's because, as the New York Times notes, in a 2009 voter registration application obtained from the Miami-Dade County Elections Department, Mr. Bush marked Hispanic in the field labeled race/ethnicity. That's right, Jeb Bush, a very white guy from a very white family, claimed that he was Hispanic. Sorry, Jeb, but just because you can speak Spanish doesn't mean you're Hispanic. Now Bush has been joking about the mistake on Twitter, tweeting out, "My mistake! Don't think I fooled anyone!" And Bush's son, Jeb Bush Jr., chimed in, tweeting, "LOL, laughed out loud. Come on, Dad, think you checked the wrong box. Honorary Latino." But all jokes aside, lying on a voter registration form is called voter fraud. It's a felony with up to 5 years in jail as the penalty. So if Republicans are so serious about combating voter fraud, shouldn't they be calling on Jeb Bush to be sent to the big house? Let's ask Neil McCabe, conservative columnist for townhall.com and editor of the Washington Mercury. Neil, welcome back.
Hey, glad to be with you, Tom.
Great to see you. So, when is Jeb going to jail? And are you going to call for it? Are you going to lead the charge?
Well, it's interesting.
I know you're opposed to voter fraud.
Oh, yes, I abhor it. Of course, President Grant said that the best way to get rid of a bad law was to enforce it. And so this may be a case of if we do enforce this law against poor John Ellis Bush, then maybe, we can throw out some of these labeling categories and everything else that we have to deal with and move towards that label-less society that we all yearn for.
Isn't well, that's a whole separate issue, and that has to do with statistics that Congress asked the FEC to compile, the Federal Election Commission to compile.
And I do want to point out, though, Tom, that at the end of the New York Times article, it sort of poo-pooed the idea that Jeb Bush would actually be arrested because you would have to determine if it was willful. And he may have just checked the wrong box. But he is the head of a Latino or Hispanic household, certainly.
But in Texas, there have been people prosecuted, in Texas and other states, one of the most egregious ones, I believe I'm remembering right, was in Texas, where people thought, people got out of jail, got off probation, paid their debt to society, they thought everything was done, went in, registered to vote, voted in an election and got arrested for voting because it's illegal to vote if you're an ex-felon in Texas. It's illegal to vote for the rest of your life. Now, those people, they were not trying to sneak a vote in or anything like that. If Jeb Bush's defense is, I wasn't trying to do anything wrong, that's true of about 90% of all the so-called voter fraud that happens in the United States. It's about 35 or 40 cases a year, but the vast majority of it is ex-felons voting, not realizing that they can't vote. The secondary part of it are the people who are voting on behalf of a spouse, typically an infirm spouse or an elderly spouse or a child.
Yeah, and I think that, Tom, we would both agree that for years, willful or, that you had to be cognizant that you were being criminal was part of the law. And increasingly, they're taking that cognizance measure out. And I think that's a mistake. Well,
Neil, the old saying is ignorance of the law is no excuse.
Yeah, well,
by the way, if I may, Neil, this is, let me read to you from the form that Jeb Bush signed. This was right on the form, right below his signature. Criminal offense. It was in all caps. Criminal offense. It is a third-degree felony to submit false information. Maximum penalties are $5,000 and/or 5 years in prison. Now, if you read that before you signed your name to something, wouldn't you make sure that you had checked the right boxes?
Well, of course, if I had looked up the U.S. government definition of Hispanic, I might say that there's some room there. Because basically, if you read the census definition, Hispanic is sort of a state of mind, It's heritage, it's nationality, it's whether you speak it.
Jeb Bush comes from, you look up WASP in the dictionary and there's a picture of the Bush family.
Listen, we all know about that poor and humble family, but he is the head of a Hispanic household. And who could forget George H.W. Bush pointing out Jeb's kids on the tarmac to Ronald Reagan, referring to his grandchildren as, see those little brown ones over there? I mean, those were Jeb's kids.
Yeah, but that wasn't Jeb. They're not voting.
Well, the man lives in a Hispanic household, and so I mean, certainly we allow people to self-report.
So this is his new excuse?
Well,
You're
let me
making
just
it up
say.
For him?
Well, listen. I mean, he doesn't need me to carry water for him, but we allow people to self-report gender or orientation. Why don't we allow people to self-report nationality or heritage?
Well, on the form where you self-report gender, it doesn't say if you lie, you go to jail for 5 years. This form said if you lie, you go to jail for 5 years. Jeb Bush lied, and nobody wants to talk about holding him accountable. Whereas, some poor felon in Texas, his ass is going to be thrown in jail. Pardon my.
Now, and those guys, I would walk with you to free those people, Tom. I mean, I really feel for them, and it's a terrible thing that happened to them. However, I mean, who can deny that Jeb speaks Spanish? He lives in a Spanish household, and he may, at that point, he might have been feeling particularly Spanish. On St. Patrick's Day, everybody's Irish, right? And so maybe he was just.
Hey, it
works.
Mood. It works for you, Neil.
That mood
apparently, it works for him.
You know.
Neil McCabe. It's always great seeing you, Neil. Thanks for dropping by tonight.